Greetings, everyone. We apologize for a little delay in our getting started, but we are happy to welcome you to this webinar, this career webinar on K-12 teaching. My name is Joy Connolly. I'm honored to serve as president of the American Council of Learned Societies, ACLS. I've held this role since 2019. I had about 8 months in the role before the pandemic began, and I just mentioned that to signal a fellow feeling to all of you. I imagine just about everyone here is 3 years into this, is bound together by concern for the well-being of especially the emerging generation of scholars who are seeking gainful employment and rewarding employment, including in the exciting sphere of K-12 teaching. This has all been, I think, accelerated by the pandemic, the desire and the need for PhDs to share their talents and their skills in spheres outside of higher education as it's conventionally defined. This is an area and a goal, a project to help PhDs find their paths outside of academia and share the wealth of humanistic knowledge and learn from the wealth of knowledge outside the academy in a dialogical way. This has been a project of ACLS for many years. Almost 15 years ago, the Mellon Foundation began to fund a program called the ACLS Mellon Public Fellows, really a signature program that broke a lot of ground in the minds of faculty, of scholars around the country by placing PhDs in the humanities in a variety of jobs in nonprofits. That's been succeeded by a program also funded generously by the Mellon Foundation, a program called the Leading Edge Fellowship, which places humanities PhDs in nonprofits, still this time with a focus on social justice organizations advocating for or working directly in areas of social justice and racial justice. So, as I say, we have a long history and significant run of experience in helping people, humanities PhDs, humanistic social sciences PhDs, find their path, and we believe strongly, we always have, that expressing themselves in the arena of K-12 education is not only an honorable but urgently needed profession. And it's where the high school teaching in particular, but with roots in grammar school and junior high school teaching, is the fountain really of the roots of students coming to college curious about humanistic fields. ACLS's mission is all about the advancement of humanistic knowledge, and part of that is attracting and retaining students in the classroom in college that helps sustain the whole machine. If not to, I don't want to use in non-human metaphor, but it does help maintain the machine, the engine of higher education, those undergraduate enrollments. And it's the memories and the knowledge, the experience, the admiration that students have for their teachers in pre-college classes that we know serves as the driver for them registering for and majoring in the humanities and social sciences when they reach the university stage. So for all these reasons, and I'll add one more. I mean, we also believe very much in that the walls that have grown up between the high school world, the K-12 world of education, and the college and the graduate school world of education need to be broken down, because we have so much to learn from each other. And we hope that in a small but real way, this series of panels that we've been holding for the last couple of years, celebrating the achievements of PhDs and people advocating for and supporting the humanities in K-12 education. We hope that this is having an effect, because we're needed out there, and we need the out there. By the out there, I mean all the hundreds and thousands of young people in our schools around the country, public and private, all types. So I'm speaking to you in the place of Liz Fernandez, who's not able to join us quite yet today. We're in touch with Liz now. Liz is in her 26th year as the administrator of a big job fair to promote diversity. It's a now virtual fair that draws prospective faculty and independent schools together. She's also a leadership coach. She's a great advocate for people finding their way and making the contribution they want to make. So I'm sorry that Liz can't join us today, but I'm going to take her role. I mean, so far as we know. So I'm going to take her role for a few minutes and ask my our panelists who have been so generous with their time to introduce themselves at this point. And thank you all while you're coming online for joining us and taking time out of your busy lives to share your knowledge and experience with our audience today. And if you don't mind, I'm simply going to refer to you in the order in which you appear on your on my Zoom screen, and I'll just ask you to say your names and a few words about what brings us together with you and brings you here on our panel today. Nikki, Sarah, and Colin, we look forward to hearing from you. And again, thank you so much. We know how busy you are. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Nikki. I am an independent school graduate. I started my teaching in a public school right after graduating from college. And while I'm very excited, I was excited to get my PhD. Very early on, I realized I never got to see my students after I taught them. And they kind of I was teaching at a large research institution, and I would teach them for a semester and they would disappear. And I never got to see them grow, unlike the teaching students I worked with getting certified. And so I realized there was something missing in that. And so I was really drawn back to the independent school world. I've been teaching since 1996, and I love my independent school world. And I'm really happy to be back here. I know we'll have a chance to talk more in a more nuanced way. I've taught private, public, day, boarding, Quaker, single sex, co-ed, got a range of experiences. I'm at my alma mater now where my children also attend. So my choices have been based on where my family is at the moment and where I need to be. And so I think that's a key part of making the fit right for you. It has been for me, and my journey has evolved as I've evolved since 1996. But I think really watching the student grow, which is the piece that was for me. I would see a student for 6 months or 4 months or however long the term was, and they would disappear. And that was really missing. So I look forward to being a part of this conversation today. Thanks, Joy.
Thank you. And Nikki, did you, oh, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to say, Nikki, did you say your area in which you got the PhD?
Oh, sorry. So, so my original area was English and education. And then I fell in love with media studies. So I have a degree in a master's in media studies and then radio, television, film from UT Austin. That's where the doctoral is. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. Sarah, please.
Hi, everyone. I am Sarah Lannom. I teach Latin and Greek, and I coach track and cross country at the Brearley School. I kind of fell into the secondary school education sphere. Kind of, it was definitely not a direction I was expecting my career to go. I went straight from undergrad into a PhD program, and I thought I really wanted to go the professorial route. I loved doing research and spending 8 to 10 hours in the library because I'm weird like that. But then I started teaching, and I thought, wow, these kids that I'm teaching are really interesting, and I like seeing them grow. And as I got to know the undergrads in my department better, I ended up becoming the assistant director of undergraduate studies for my department in graduate school, and took a really hands-on role with helping them pick out courses, figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, etc. And so the summer before I was set to go on a dissertation completion fellowship and hit the job market, scary, I said, I really don't want to do this higher ed thing. I think I like being in the classroom. So I'm going to focus my job search just on secondary schools. And luckily, Brearley liked me, and that's where I've been ever since.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Colin.
Hey there, guys. Yeah, I'm Colin Harte. I got my PhD in ethnomusicology. I had started teaching through the New York City Teaching Fellows music in the Bronx in about 2005. So I've been teaching about 16 years, 11 in the New York City school system and 13 in New York State. Yeah, I teach for CUNY as well, so I do about 8 to 10 classes a year for them. And then we have a recording studio, piano, and a world music curriculum with a percussion ensemble focus. So it's just been a nice marriage between the research side of things and my interest in music ed and world music, and then kind of having that manifest itself in ensembles with the students here. So that's been my path.
Thank you so much. It's interesting to hear the diverse paths that with different levels of intentionality and experience of the area, and partly drawing on what we were chatting about right before this event began. But that's something I want to underline, because everybody in our prior panels on this topic, it's become clear. Everybody has their own way in, and our desire is not to. With this series is not to say, here we have the key, but simply, to share the multiple experiences, the plural experiences that bring people to have rewarding careers in this space that, to be fair, most PhDs, I'm guessing, don't think about as a first option when they start, but many these days, by the time they're halfway through the PhD and maybe even earlier, are beginning to think about. So we're here to stir up that curiosity and display the multitudinousness of paths in that direction. So let me start by asking you a couple of questions, and I should say that we are going to hold questions or invite questions from the audience. But let me kick it off by asking all of you to comment on, what you've already said a little bit about what drew you to teaching, to pre-college teaching. Can you say a little bit more about the rewards and potentially the challenges too for PhDs who are, if you forgive the overused word, pivoting to consider this a teaching career in a public or private school? Speaking from your own experience, others, both the benefits and also some of the challenges. We can dig a little deeper into both. Please, Nikki.
So for me, I found I had a lot more control over where I could land. When I finished in December of 2007, and I was far from home. When I went to Texas, it was a little bit after 9/11, and I was really far. I'm from New York City originally, and I was far from home. And I was ready to get back to home, and I had more options and I had more control. There was a lot of schools, and I could control my career where I wanted to live, and publications and the pace of my career was a little bit more in my control. And that meant a lot to me professionally. Could I still go back to college? Yes. Could I figure it out in a couple of years? Yes. I felt like I had the options. I was still early in my career. And I wasn't sure what I wanted it to look like. And that felt really good. I felt like I didn't have to make a choice, and I had the power to choose. And of course, I never chose to go back because I really liked the control I had. I didn't want to have to live somewhere I didn't want to be. And all of the jobs were in places right then, because there was a whole generation of faculty who weren't going anywhere, right? That in radio, television, film, communications, my mentor and all of her colleagues weren't going anywhere, and they were staying put, and all of the adjunct positions were driving all over the place, and that made it really hard to get jobs. And I was sending out 20 or 30 applications and nothing was happening. And so I felt empowered by the fact that I was getting all these interviews. And so that felt better. I was getting good paying job opportunities. And so being able to make choices that felt like I had, like a possible way to pay off those student loans I wasn't going to get mocked by my parents. They actually weren't going to mock me, but they were going to wag their fingers a little bit. That felt good. And so being able to make an empowered choice that allowed me to live the life I imagined, rather than one of like, do I really want to drive between 3 different places or live in states or areas of the country that weren't, appealing to me. So for me, it was about being closer to family, closer to where I wanted to be, and feeling in control.
Thank you. Other comments, please just jump in. Sarah.
I think one thing that really cemented it for me was that when I was working with students when I was in graduate school, I felt like I was doing good work. I was like, yes, I have helped this kid learn how to write, or this kid can now translate. Yes. But I mean, it's not I didn't get the same sense of fulfillment after, researching obscure stuff about Ovid that maybe one person ever might read. And so I felt like I was doing more good in the world, in the classroom, than I was in the bowels of Widener Library. And yeah, I will absolutely second the flexibility with the job search thing. The field of classics never really quite recovered from the 2008 stock market crash, because a lot of universities use that as an excuse to be like, oh great, we can slash all the classics departments and create more room for STEM. Yes, and so a bunch of tenure track positions just got flushed, and people started staying in jobs longer. And I knew people who had to move 5 times in 6 years before finding a tenure track job, and that would have driven me absolutely crazy. So
in terms of going into the public school system, I had taught beforehand, and then I went back and got the PhD, and having those skills of just being in the classroom was helpful. But having those research skills really enriched the curriculum, which is a lot of fun. And being in New York City, the multicultural nature of it is wonderful for drawing upon different sources for the curriculum. And then also in terms of practicalities, it's unionized. It's well paying. It was much higher paying than anything else I had in terms of job offers. I wanted to be back in New York City, participate in those musical communities I had moved away from, family, and so it made sense. And to kind of continue that work and create ensembles, it was a lot of fun. So that side of things, especially in the Bronx, where music programs were stripped away and now are slowly coming back, you do have a lot of freedom, because it's not a Regents course or a state tested course, to create that. And with that research training, it's great. Some of the challenges are, it is a culture shock to go from academia to, for myself, I went right into the South Bronx. And I had taught in the Bronx before, so I knew what I was getting into. But this is issues from dealing with student discipline to just being back in the classroom. Funding can be an issue, so that those skills of writing grants was really helpful. But that takes time to build, amass instruments, books, community buy-in, and understanding from administration. And so you do have to keep that in mind, and that's nice that you have a PhD, but also some people have no idea what that is, or evaluate or understand exactly, so that there is that component to it as well. But it's quite rewarding, and it's nice to see actually take some of these ideas and put them right into practice with the students, which I enjoy a lot.
There's you mentioned the transition, so I'm going to hold with that for a second, and because this is always an area of question where audience members have a lot of questions, and we may be able to anticipate some of them if we talk about this right up front. That because it is often an obstacle to just the fact that graduate students or recent PhDs or people who have been teaching for a long time and maybe have tenure who want to transition. And I see someone in the chat has already said, I'm transitioning from a corporate career and I want to get into teaching. So wherever one is in the spectrum, how do you do it? That's what people want to know. You know, how do I make this turn? How do I best prepare? What are people looking for on my CV or my resume? Do I call it a CV or do I call it a resume? And in particular, why don't we kind of chunk it up a bit and not try to take on the whole question, but in particular, how can one prepare oneself if people in our audience might be interested, as we know they are, in taking your track? What were your steps, or maybe you want to say, looking back, what would you have done differently? But how does one take this, jump onto this path? Lots of possible good answers. Yeah, Sarah, kick us off.
I made sure that I taught every semester in graduate school that I could, and that including teaching a summer intensive Latin course. So I could say, you know, I have a very solid base in teaching both classical languages. I also think that the assistant DUF position helped a lot, because it's very trendy at independent schools now to say, oh, we have this amazingly robust advising program. So if you can get some type of student advising work on your CV, that's really, really helpful. And the academic dean at Brearley told me a few years ago, when we were running a search in the classics department, that when they're inviting PhDs who are, you know, finishing up to want campus, they know that you might not have had any experience on the middle school or high school level. The first time I ever taught 7th grade Latin was in my teaching demo, which was a very interesting but really fun experience. And anyway, the academic dean told me that they're not looking for people to just come in and do it absolutely perfectly. What they're looking for is someone who has a genuine desire to connect with kids and who absolutely can do it. So yeah.
Are there any experiences you could have with kids before that demo that any of you might have, so that when you're walking in for the job interview, it's not the very first time you are teaching kids who may be 11 or 14? I didn't mean that to interrupt the flow of your other answers. Sorry.
You can always ask to observe classes. You know, I think it's important when you get involved in this work to be realistic and kind of honest with yourself, what you envision in terms of what type of school, community, student population, what you imagine of creating with the curriculum, and being kind of honest with yourself with your skill sets, because different, you know, school systems work differently, different schools, each school is kind of its own little world. So it's important to think about that. And if you have no teaching experience, at least maybe contacting a school and just sitting in on a class or two and seeing how that is, and talking to a senior teacher is really important. I think it's also important to think about certification. You know, there's Teach for America, there was the New York City Teaching Fellows, I think that's still going on, or thinking the private route or whatnot, but being thinking about those things so that you have as many opportunities as possible, and really understanding those grade levels as well. Like, do you want to teach in high school? Do you want to teach in middle school? Those are two very different things. And without knowing that, you can kind of step into something you might not want to, or prefer something else. So it's important to kind of get that immersive experience in the school for a couple of days, or at least a day, before you start trying to teach or even give a demo lesson, in my opinion.
So building off of that a little bit, I was jotting down a few things that Sarah and Colin were both speaking. I think that's what's your why? My side game is working as a professional and academic coach, and I always ask people, what's your why? Why do you want to make that move? What's the motivation? And what do you want it to look like on the other end? And so if you want to make that If you could, sometimes schools don't let you observe, but if you can, I think Colin's absolutely right. And I think at the core, I've made some very interesting career moves. I was very unhappy in my job last year as assistant director of an upper school, and I quit my job. They were changing the conditions for this coming school year, and I quit my job without a new job lined up. I don't have a trust fund or a lot of money, so that was an incredibly bold, courageous, crazy thing to do as a parent of 2 children who are starting a private school, who started kindergarten this year. But I knew my health and well-being. Maybe this is the great resignation. Maybe this is one of the COVID side effects. But I knew that I needed to put my well-being ahead of everything else. And so I did, and I took a step of faith that I could find something else. 8 days later, my current job was posted, right? And I knew that I'm a scrappy girl and I could get something else, whether or not it was going to be adjunct things all over the place, whatever. But knowing what your priorities are, and I knew that my health and well-being was more important. So know what your priorities are as you're looking at these things, and look at those job descriptions. But the thing that I would say to everyone considering this, whether or not, if you're looking to switch as a big switch from corporate to teaching, start looking now. I have always suggested to people that they have a Google Doc or whatever method you want, a Word document, and save the job postings they love. I have several of them. I date them in the title of it. So 2022 versus 2023. Even if I'm not actually applying to it, if there's something appealing about that job posting, I will bold it. I will insert a comment just so that I remember what drew me into it, right? If it's the way they're talking about student life, if it's something that's really cool about it, so that I remember what I liked about things, so that I can remember that this is something I might want to look for again in the future. I find that I don't always remember what I love about a job, but if I save it in that way, I can come back to it and think, I want to find something else like that. And so I always think that if we're cultivating these lists of things that are calling us, it's easier to come back to it later. It's kind of your wish list, right? And so we don't have to jump from a frying pan into a fire, but if we know what's out there and we keep looking, it's really helpful. I found a great job in Pittsburgh of a school that I've been a school leader. I've been in these positions that look great on paper that turn out not to be. I'm much happier teaching, but there's a job in Pittsburgh that epitomized what school leadership should be, with mentors both inside the school and outside the school. I saved that job description because it was designed by someone who knew how to cultivate leadership. And that's the type of thing that you keep, because you want to remember that moving forward. And so I just encourage everyone to think about what you're looking for and why, and so that you can remember how you want to feel when you're going into these searches. So.
And just to keep it transparent for people for whom this is really new territory, can you, before we turn to questions, audience questions, which we're going to do in a minute, could you say really each of you concretely, like where you go or where you have gone or went in the past for notices about jobs and information about this piece of the educational world?
Sure. Sorry, I forgot that's it's since I've been obsessively doing it for so many years, it's second nature. So for the National Association of Independent Schools, NAIS.org, has a job seekers page. You can put your website, you can list your credentials there and they can send you updates, but they list it by states and by positions regularly. So that's a wonderful resource. And then by your individual state, they have independent school resources also. Public, there are other places too, like Indeed.com and other places. Indeed actually gives you salary histories and other things too. Sometimes there's other resources, but I use the National Association of Independent Schools because it's the kind of the overarching resource. I don't know what anyone else uses, but that's the one that I go to.
You can also sign up with a placement service. I went with Carney Sando, which is really great. You have to apply to work with them, but then once you do, they have like everything. They have your transcripts, your personal statement, 3 letters of recommendations, and they will just send all of that stuff to schools who have signed up with them, who are looking for teachers in your subject area. And I mean, Kearney Sando isn't the only one. There's also Educators Ally, Manhattan Teacher Placements. If you want something in the South, the Southern Teachers Agency. And that is really nice for schools too, because they just have all of your stuff right there, and they can and they can decide within like 5 minutes whether or not you are worth calling.
I'm more familiar with New York City and New York State, but a couple of things I can recommend is one, when you're doing this job search, really shop around, visit the schools in person if you can. I know Zoom is convenient, but you get a real feel for the building, the leadership, the other staff, and sometimes even the students, just the school culture by visiting. The other thing is to think about, public-private, unionized, how much you're actually making. Sometimes, in a public school in New York City, you would make more than you might make at CUNY. And even years of when I came back from teaching in the PhD program, they gave me credit for that, which is great. So that's an important thing to think about, that boosted my salary to a point that I was like, not that that's the only thing, but it's an important thing, especially when you're living in an urban environment. It's expensive. Really, it can be a game changer. The other thing is, some schools, if you're looking for your certification, will allow you to come on board and get it as you teach. So it's not a barrier necessarily. OLAS jobs, OLAS, is for New York State. And then the New York City system, even though it's listed in there, has its own listings, which you can Google, just NYC DOE, and they have those, and they have job fairs, and there's also the Teaching Fellows and Teach for America. So those are some good resources. And it's important to think, even if you decide to leave the New York City school system, which is huge, you can move around, obviously a lot of opportunities, you can still work in the New York State system and still continue to earn retirement and whatnot. So
thank you for all of you for these really practical answers, because that's what a lot of audience members want. They want some hooks, some websites to start searching in, and some leads. So thank you for that. I'm going to, go ahead, Colin.
Sorry, one last thing. The other thing is, it's not unusual to have a PhD and teach, at least in the New York City school system. In just the school I'm in, which is a small school, about 250, there's another person with a PhD, and a number of the music teachers I know have some sort of doctorate or something. So it's commonplace to a degree.
Thanks. And I'm going to follow up, Colin, with one question. I think it was in the Q&A list, and that has to do with certification, because that comes up a lot when we often get emails about this after events. People saying, understood the path is pretty, pretty smooth, or at least known when it comes. It's easier to describe in brief, as you've done, all of you, talking about the move to independent schools. But for public schools, there's a lot of confusion out there. Do I need a certificate? Do I need a master's of education? Do I need another degree of some sort? How long is the training period? Does it take 2 years, et cetera? Can you shine some light on that, Colin or Nikki too?
Yeah, if you have a certificate from a different state, there's usually reciprocity. So there is that, just to keep in mind if you're, a teaching certificate in Connecticut. But there's a number of different pathways, and it's thinking, in terms of New York State, each school system has their own sort of nuances to it, but and there's funding for this. So whether that's coming from the school system, or whether that's something like an AmeriCorps, where if you're teaching in a hard-to-staff area, where there'd be some extra funding to perhaps, for certification. Sometimes it's based on a number of years teaching. Sometimes they need the actual master's. It's also state to state is somewhat different too. So I'm only speaking from my New York State perspective. But there's ways to certainly fund it, and sometimes even in harder to staff areas, I got funding. They gave me enough to get a second master's in something. So it's certainly there, but it does require the time to really look at those pathways, read through them. But there's also resources like the teachers union can really help you with that, in terms of, okay, this is where I'm at. Can you advise me in ways to go? connecting with local education programs as well, where there's an advisor of like, how do I fit into this? Is this necessary? Do I need a master's? And sometimes there's just programs that move it forward. And maybe you take, for myself, I took a class or two at night for a period of time. They know you're teaching during the day, and it was it was fine. And I honestly, after I came back from my PhD, I taught for 2 years, and I got a master's in ed leadership because I knew I wanted to eventually go into administration. So it's really figuring out the geographic area you want, and then looking at those certification pathways. And then once you kind of have an idea about that, speaking to someone, and strategizing with them.
Thank you. Nikki, anything to add to that?
Colin hit the same things I would have said. I mean, my certification was in Massachusetts, and I stopped renewing it. It was every 5 years you had to renew it. I kind of gave up because it was like publish or renew, like you kind of do it on a cycle. And then I realized I was staying in independent schools and I didn't need it, which not that I didn't need it, but it wasn't applicable. And so it really is about knowing where you are, knowing what they need. And I do think he's right though about learning kind of what the landscape is and what the sort of reciprocities are. But it's interesting, there are lots of ways to do it. And that's what I think is interesting. It's taking the time to figure out what the pathways are. And now I do think it's a little bit easier with the internet. I feel really old when I say stuff like that. Back in the olden days, it was like, get a big book and you had to actually use the directory. But now I feel like you go online and it's much faster to kind of find the path. So.
Yeah, the pathway in for via Googling is not to be sneezed at in this day and age, I think. But I want to highlight, the teachers union, the DOE, Carney Sando, or other. Once you find Carney Sando on the internet, you will start finding the other names of the other firms that you mentioned. Sarah, they do try to get out there and be easy to find and easy to use. So because they're all these agencies and organizations are about helping people get on the path. So thank you for all of that. I'm going to turn to a couple of questions, and I'll say right away two things. First of all, if you're an audience member, thank you for coming again, and feel free to upvote questions that you see in the Q&A. Can use the little thumbs up to upvote those. I'm going to be paying attention to that, and also I'll be looking for the questions that are going to be the most broadly appealing or apply, to large numbers of people. So if you have questions, it's going to be helpful to cast them in the kind of the terms of the collective, and not highly personal situations, which are harder to answer to in a way that would benefit everybody. So I'm going to start. I think we've covered a lot from the first question of the track for people transitioning from corporate to teaching career. I would say, and I'll let panelists wave and cry out if they disagree with me, but I think we're talking about very similar things. It's all about jumping from one track to the other. So I think all the advice you've heard here, Princess Hoagland, for the corporate to the teaching career, everything would apply to you as well. I'm looking now at the question about the differences between teaching in a public school versus an independent school, and what would make the most sense for graduates, for grad students or PhDs who are moving into primary or secondary. So I think the questioner is trying to get at a grid here of thinking both about the private-public contrasts and comparisons, similarities and differences, and also asking, does it make a difference if you're interested in teaching younger children as opposed to teenagers? Does the public or private track seem smoother, easier to get it and jump onto? Your general thoughts on that, on both those contrasts.
I can jump in. In my experience, there's some things I miss about public school, in terms of simplicity, but there's the resources. I feel like I'm on a college campus every day. I'll be honest with you. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things that feels very that feels very decadent and lovely. And not like all college campuses are decadent, don't get me wrong, but like I feel like I'm talking to a college seminar most days when I'm teaching, not my ninth graders, my older kids, but there's some, I taught in the Concord Carlisle Public Schools in Massachusetts for 4 years, and there were some really great programs there, and I felt very, very blessed to be there. And there's some real clear objectives and the systems that were in place that aren't always in independent schools. It depends on where you are. And so there's some but some of the systems I miss sometimes. It depends on where you are. And so I'm not making that generalization overall, but sometimes there's systems that are lovely, but it's going to depend on where you are. So I think it's a hard generalization.
Understood. Anyone else want to comment on the public versus private or experiences you've had, or Colin?
I was looking for the unmute button. Yeah, I mean, my experiences in the public schools, practicalities in terms of, if you're thinking about this as a career, thinking about retirement benefits, what are the salary steps, how do you move up, thinking about who you want to teach, and thinking about resources, some schools, and thinking about funding, and actually, like I said, when you visit the school, like, what type of space are you actually, it depends on what you're teaching, but like, are you on a cart? Do you actually have a classroom? Depending on the subject, that's really important. Thinking about the history of whether there was arts or, the subject there and how it was taught, how you want to add to that or change it, is important. And thinking about those communities, you may want to just get involved and teach a bit in one place and then move. And thinking about how doable is that? Something I might add is if you're looking at certain school districts that might be more competitive for teachers, sometimes there's these connections between a school district and a local institution, and those students come from that institution and they student teach there, and then they go right into the track because they've already seen what they can do, they've made those relationships, and then they step in there. So that's also important to think about, that some of these jobs that are listed aren't necessarily actually, they already have someone in mind, and so there are certain ways of thinking about this as you're going through the job search.
Thank you. One question that comes up, I've seen this question before in prior panels that we've done on this topic at ACLS, and it's a question about really the nitty-gritty of applying, but it's I think a really core question, and that is how to deal with the experience issue. So if one hasn't had any experience teaching in the pre-college classroom, I think we wouldn't be here if it were a totally useless enterprise. Obviously, people are willing to hire people without experience teaching in pre-college, including people in this room. But I think the question is really more about navigating the application and writing a successful application. So what is it? Assuming you have a shot at high schools or grammar schools who are looking, and they may even say in their ad, we're looking for prior experience. It may still be, if it's a place you want to live in, a community you want to be a part of, worth putting in your application, worth taking a shot at it. But given the challenge of reconfiguring configuring one's teaching experience, like Sarah, you mentioned you were careful to teach every semester in graduate school, how did you yourself present your teaching, the experience you did have when you applied for jobs in the pre-college space, and maybe what would ideally you have done, and maybe you did the ideal, but some advice for our audience when it comes to presenting experience that doesn't exactly match up to what's being asked for implicitly or explicitly in the ad.
Well, in my cover letter, and also in my personal statements that I had to write for Carney Sando, I went back and looked at all of my teaching evaluations and found like common themes and said, oh, I do this well. My students attest to this other thing, and I really tried to sort of amp myself up that way. I also was a boarding school kid, so I had like familiarity with the independent schools from the other side of the desk. And I also talked about my relationships with my teachers in a high school, and said that I really wanted to help students in the way that my teachers helped me, which I think scored some points, I hope.
Thank you. Other comments on that?
I think independent schools like the idea of you being well-rounded, like you having a wealth of experiences. And so I think I often found when I was a doctoral student, I had a harder time selling myself as ready to be a competitive adjunct or a assistant, professor, because I hadn't done much, right? Like I didn't have a list of publications. I found it easier to sell myself as a teacher, right? I had, worked in the athletic department. I had taught all these. I'd been an assistant professor, assistant instructor, a TA. I could list all the courses I had taught and all the jobs on campus I'd had, and so it showed all the different hats I could put on. Kind of to Sarah's point, and I could draw from those teaching experiences and showed the different types of students I could be successful with in this setting at a university that could translate very well to their college bound, because these schools boast openly of their college preparatory muscles. So I could help prepare your students to go to where I'm coming from, right? And so it was a really nice translation, a reverse engineering sort of thing. And so it was much easier to do that than to try to fluff myself up. I found it harder to write those letters. And so that was also kind of convincing myself of like, oh, maybe that is where I should be, because this is much more natural.
Yeah, if you're looking at, say, high school, the difference between a high school senior and a college freshman, it's relatively close. So, some of that, if you're teaching undergrad, is great experience. The other thing to think about is, you may feel like you're under-experienced as a teacher, but these schools are getting someone who has a lot of content area expertise. And if you're new to teaching, that's a good bargain, actually. Because as you move on and each year, you become more and more expensive, and there's sort of a breaking point where they have to take certain funding from new teachers, et cetera. I'm not going to get into the logistics of that, but so you could be quite desirable actually to a school, even though you may have limited teaching experience, given your content training and expertise.
Terrific, thanks. And that there's I see a couple of good questions here about international experience, and I'll come to that in a second. But while we're on this topic of the applications and concrete information about that, I see a question from Katie Gonzalez that a school in my town encourages candidates to reach out even if there are no active job ads. So any tips or tricks for cold emails? What do you really have to get across in a cover letter to make sure you get that call back, or do your best to make sure you get the call back? What are schools seeking to learn about you first? That's maybe an especially tough one. In my own, I'll kick it off by saying I sit on the board of an independent school, and we were chatting a little bit about this actually before this session began or opened up for our audience publicly, and that's that sheer energy, because jobs take a lot of energy. It's not the cadence; it's just a different cadence, of course. That's just to say the obvious from teaching in college classes where you typically even if you're adjuncting 4 classes a semester, which is probably the most comparable mode, I'm guessing, from what I've heard before. It's not the same as being in the classroom most of the day or much of the day as one is in pre-college teaching. So looking for someone really, who's energetic, who's curious, who's flexible, who has a sense of humor. I mean, the kind of performing oneself can be tough in a cover letter, but I know that in the school I sit on the board of, those things are very high on the desideratum list. I mean, someone who's going to be there for their colleagues and especially, needless to say, but I'll say it anyway, really there for the kids and really present for children who are learning and developing and being eager to support that process. Did I miss anything or anything sound off in that answer? Great, thanks. Let me turn to a question raised by a couple people, which is, I think, not anyone's personal experience here. So I'll be asking the panelists to maybe think about their colleagues or think about their school culture or broader professional experience. And that's about international students. Do you know, can you speak to the questions about the possibilities for people who don't have U.S. citizenship, who are seeking to teach either in the independent school track or the public school track? I can imagine there would be special interest because of the desire to diversify, just like in the professoriate in the college faculty, among college and university faculty, there's got to be, I imagine, a similar desire to include global perspectives and people who didn't grow up, who don't have citizenship here in the United States. But any experiences or advice or special blockages that you know of for international people without U.S. citizenship with PhDs seeking to make this move?
So I would think I would encourage, if they're applying for a job that has no specific requirement of like not like a language teacher that speaks the language, or to make sure that they're finding out what support is offered to them in the visa process. I did have a colleague have some real issues with her visa a few years ago and not have a lot of institutional support in that. And so you want to, in the name of transparency, know if the institution can help them in the process. I think you're absolutely right, Joy. There is a strong desire to have a faculty that represents the student population and the global population for all the benefits we know that brings. But we want to make sure that we are going to go in knowing what our needs are and that they're going to get the support if they're going to require it. Because the worst thing you want is to not get the support you need. It was very hard I had a colleague who just wasn't getting the help she needed institutionally, and it was really hard for her to be doing all the things that we were asking her to do institutionally and to not get the help she needed. And so I always think it's important to interview the school as much as you are being interviewed too, and say, what's the process for this and what's the process for that, and what are all the things you're asking me, and how does that process work? And so go in looking to find out more about all of the things that you will need from them as much as all that they will need from you. So.
I want to mention as well, sticking with this international question for a moment longer, and saying one more thing about that. Don't forget, people on the in the audience, that whatever school, wherever you got your PhD or where you're in the process of getting your PhD, there are going to be resources now. They're probably going to be designed for the undergraduate students who are entering the workforce, and not specifically for PhD students, but there are offices who are not going to turn you away, if you walk through the door or give them a call. Probably I would say walking through the door or calling is better than just emailing, because emails are easier to leave there, to leave in the inbox and not answer. But if you walk through the door or give a call to a career services office at your old university, so to speak, or your current university where you're getting your PhD, you're likely to find some good information about and quite up to date and targeted. I mean, colleges and universities are a world away from the 90s when I graduated from college in terms of helping undergraduates figure out their next steps. So again, you will probably, I'm guessing, I shouldn't say probably, you may be told after a few conversations, okay, we've got this is really an office designed, it's focused on undergraduates and undergraduate support. But I would be really surprised if you don't get at least some help in that first initial step from the office, the career office in your university. So I just wanted to add that to the resources that that people are asking for. Actually, let me pause here and say, Liz, welcome. We're so glad to see you here.
Hi, Joy. Hi, everybody. My sincere apologies. It is very unfortunate that I have missed the beginning of this, but I am very pleased to be here at this moment and excited to just connect with everyone and provide as much information as I possibly can to everyone who is listening and who will view this webinar at some point. And again, my sincere apologies for missing the very beginning. It's wonderful to see you, Joy, and to see everyone.
It's great to have you. I'm glad you could join us for this phase. We're taking questions from the audience and which are coming in through the chat. And let me just say for those, because I didn't give your full introduction, Liz, when you weren't here. So let me just say that for many years before joining the firm, a firm called Jones that consults in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, as well as strategic change management and leadership development, Liz served as assistant head of school and ethics faculty member at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School. She's also served on the faculty of the National Association of Independent Schools, the Student Leadership Diversity Conference. We heard about that group, the National Association of Independent Schools, already from Nikki. And she's got other starry achievements to her name. So thank you again for joining us. We were talking in the last few minutes about both the appeal that international students, people, non-US citizens with PhDs seeking to move into the K-12 teaching space, the appeal that they would have to schools that wanted a global perspective and to diversify their faculties. And we're now moving, I think, to a couple of other questions about the nitty-gritty of the application, because that continues to be in our panels on this topic. What we get the most positive feedback. People really want to feel armed for the fight, and with some particular tools for applying and how to put one's best foot forward. So I'm looking at a question from Jennifer Topali or Topali. I'm assuming, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. That who points out that her CV is a lot longer than a traditional resume, and what does a resume look like when you're applying for a job in the pre K through 12 state?
Resumes look really differently depending on the position, depending on the role that someone is pursuing. And the difference between a resume and a CV is traditionally the CV presents the body of your professional work over your career. Some people have very, very long CVs, and some industries, for instance, higher ed, want to see everything. That's traditionally the way that we sort of see the differences. Within independent schools, they want to see highlights. They don't want to sit and read more than, say, a 4-page resume if you're going for an administrative position, 4 to 5 pages as a candidate for an administrative position. As a candidate for a teaching position, really high level, it's okay to list without giving specific information. If you have been published multiple times, you can put something like, publications, and then in parentheses, just say, below is a partial list. A full list is available upon request. If you taught in multiple spaces, then you can say, partial list below, a full list is available upon request, and really just make the resume be a taste of your professional background in a way that is very appealing and that is catering to the position that you are interested in pursuing. That's what I would say, I think, as sort of the most ideal way to present yourself as a viable candidate. Just a high level, quick overview of your experience with a mention of a more extensive review is available upon request.
They can always ask for more info. You're exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And it's true that I feel in university college jobs, cover letters are getting longer and longer and longer and longer, and including abstracts for dissertations and descriptions of talks and descriptions of conferences organized. And that I'm taking from what you're saying, Liz, that is not the name of the game here.
Absolutely. I will tell you, as someone who when I was in my previous role, I read and reviewed somewhere between, depending on the position, for instance, a science level position is in less demand, I would say, than an English or humanities or history type position. So again, depending on the discipline, it was very likely that as someone who was reviewing resumes as part of a hiring team, I was reviewing anywhere between 100 to, sometimes up to 500 resumes. And I can promise you that it's a very, very cursory overview at that level. And so if you have a very long resume, you're really in some ways at a disadvantage, because if I'm doing a 30-second scan, a 30-second scan barely gets me through the second page if you're well prepared as a resume reviewer to get a sense of someone as a candidate. I'm not saying that it's fair. I'm not saying that it's ideal. I'm saying that that's essentially what a resume team member is going to be doing, is particularly for positions that are in high demand.
Got it. Let me turn to an area, and I know ACLS is an organization whose mission as of 1919, in our original founding right after World War I, in the middle of a global pandemic, we were founded as an organization to advance humanistic learning, and that's why we've been emphasizing that side of things in this panel. But I see someone asking, Maria Cortez, thank you for your question, asking about transitioning to pre-college teaching from a STEM or STEM interdisciplinary background. And my own instinct is that everything that's been said applies to people in that category too. Do you all see that the same way? Anything special, a shout out to add to people from the STEM side who are applying to pre-college jobs? Any special problems there or issues to put on the table? Looks like we can reassure our questioner that that there's a good field to explore. Good to conclude. And then, go ahead, Liz, sorry.
I was just going to say to this question, I was really thinking about it. I think one of the things that would be really important for a PhD student to be able to, or an applicant in the STEM field, to be able to demonstrate, particularly in their interview and certainly in their cover letter, is that when you're familiar with a discipline, you also have the capacity to help others, particularly young people, through lab work, be able to enjoy and appreciate conservation, botany, environmental studies, chemistry, whatever the sciences are. So many of our independent schools are really, really committed to schools and educators that make the science come alive, that have the learning occur through doing, through practice, as opposed to through lecture. So a level of engagement, a level of intentional, I don't know how else to put it, just really being able to communicate a genuine interest and an ability, I think, to be able to help students understand and grasp the concepts for each of those disciplines is going to be really key, particularly through inquiry and the practice of laboratory work and creative, interactive type labs and experiments.
Great, thank you. I am also amazed. I just mentioned long cover letters, but I've also been somewhat taken aback at the length of some applications that I see at the college and university level, the number of questions people have to answer, which in some ways, I think, given the job market and the way it is at the university level, it's so challenging. It just seems like a terrible imposition for people who are already, badly burdened by the job search itself to throw at them, a million individualized questions. That said, there are some ways in which applications have gotten longer because schools are trying to learn more from at the outset about candidates. And I see this question from Claire Carnap about teaching portfolios and whether applications typically ask for them, and if so, how differently should you configure them as the way you might do it for a higher ed job? Any thoughts on that? Are you seeing your school ask for teaching portfolios, and how, if so, how does one put one's best foot forward there? Or maybe not. Maybe they don't get asked for. Generally not is what I'm picking up. But no, go ahead.
I've had to submit a lesson plan. I've had to, but not portfolios. I've had to submit a couple of lesson plans. I've had to submit for leadership things. I've had to do more like do nows, which I love. I love the do now sort of things where you have to actually do something in their interview, because I think that's actually relevant rather than random. Then like the portfolios feel really contrived. They can feel, depending on what the task is, but the do nows I'm okay with. But the lesson plan also was great, because that also feels like, show me something that how you're thinking. But the portfolios, I wouldn't worry too much about having to do. I haven't had to do one of those, and I've been on and off the market for several years in independent school world, kissing lots of frogs. So
I would say that I have seen requests for portfolios in the fine arts, and that when we talk about portfolios, there can be that portfolio that you carry around with you, and certainly at the job fair that I lead later this spring, it's certainly welcome for you to bring it. Whether or not a school will ask for it is doubtful. And that's partly because the fair itself is a very quick opportunity to network, and it's really meant to create a connection that is then continued outside of the fair. However, I will say that during an interview, on site at a school, it does make sense for you to bring it, just for you to have it as a just in case. The last thing I'll say is if you are in the fine arts in particular, and you have a website, instead of bringing your entire portfolio, I would highly encourage you to have your website as one of the links on your resume, as a very easy way to present the body of work that you have as an artist, and avoid having to carry something around. You can refer to your website as a way to really save yourself having to carry a large portfolio and still be able to share and present. The other thing I would say is, if you are going to job fairs, or if you're meeting candidates and you do have a website, and you have something like a tablet, that is a great way to bring something with you that is not your enormous, portfolio. I know they can be heavy. I have plenty of friends and candidates who are, in the fine arts. So that's what I would say.
And is picking up on a question, is a statement of teaching philosophy typically requested in these situations when applying to K-12 jobs? Sounds like sometimes yes, so the answer would be yes. If that might come up, it's better to be prepared. Oh, and I see, thank you very much to Timothy Nelson, who says he just recently had to submit a teaching portfolio and a student feedback and teaching philosophy, a diversity statement. Thank you, Timothy Nelson, for calling that out, because that is, that's a newer, but it's now been around for some years now, requirement or in colleges and universities as well. So, so thank you for that comment. I wanted to, before we, thank you. Yes, don't, those of you who are interested in Timothy Nelson's input, feel free to go ahead and look in the answered column and you'll see a couple comments left from him. Before we wrap up in the next few minutes, I want to ask a couple more questions. First, one that's been hanging here for a while, so thank you for your patience, an anonymous person. How do you know which teachers' unions will fight for workers and which are less involved? How this is an opportunity actually for those of you who have worked in unionized environments to talk about that, keeping in mind that a good number of members of our audience might not have done so, or might have done so and felt that that was a pretty specialized experience in being in a PhD program, student but also worker. It's a different kind of for some people it feels different from working as an employee, as a staff member. Without the student role. So some comments about how to gauge a union and its values. I know I can say, just to kick us off, when I moved to CUNY, which was a unionized school, of course, I found the statements. Because I was new to that. I had been working at NYU before and wasn't familiar with a full-on faculty, staff, graduate student unionized environment. And I found the statements on the website of the union itself. I mean, it sounds like a kind of common sense, obvious answer, but I did find that really helpful. It also gave me information of whom to contact if I had questions, but they laid out their priorities and their, the lobbying agenda and their hopes for the next contract, very clearly. And it was very, in my view, a great worker forward advocacy group. And that came across really clearly. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Thanks, Joy, for that response. Within independent schools, there is a wide assumption that unions do not exist. And that's actually an incorrect assumption. There are independent schools that have unions. They may not necessarily belong to some of the larger, more well-known unions like the UFT or the AFT, I want to say. And please forgive me, that's the wrong name of the other more well-known public school union. There are certainly unions within the independent school community at the national level and certainly at the local level. Some are specific to the institution itself. They have unionized as a faculty, and some have unionized through a third party. And I think knowing that information, there's really two ways to know that. One, it's available directly on the school's website. There's some sort of mention of it, and then you can do your own background study and just sort of inquire and see, get a different sense of what is available to you. The second is, and I speak specifically to the independent school world, we're, as a community, independent school educators are very well networked, and you are often one person away from someone who knows the school that you're applying to, or someone within the school that you are applying to. And so getting that information, are you a unionized school? What are some of the things, where are you in the negotiation contract for a collective bargaining agreement, et cetera, et cetera. There would be ways to get that additional information if you know someone or know of someone who knows someone at the school. And it's way more simple than perhaps it sounds because of the strong independent school network where people have either previously worked at or gone to school with or friendly with someone who can answer a question about a particular school that you are pursuing.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Well, we're getting close to our end time, and we always end. We want to start wrapping up well before the our end time, respecting everybody's time, especially that of our panelists. I really appreciate your time and insights. Before we wrap up, though, I want to give each of our panelists, including Liz, a chance to say a final word, piece of advice, put a theme on the table, or something you think we should have touched on that we didn't, or something you were expecting to be asked that you weren't. I'd like to open the floor for each of you before we end. Colin.
Yeah, I appreciate being on the panel. It's been a pleasure hearing this stuff, and stuff Liz was saying about keeping the resumes and cover letter short is feedback I actually got from the current job I'm at way back when. Just a practical thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these schools, and it depends on the school, but many of them begin the job search in April when they're getting feedback of people might be putting in, hey, I'm leaving. And that continues to the summer where suddenly you're getting more and more. So if you're used to sort of I wrote some grants and I'm going to do research and I'll be traveling here or I'll be there or whatever, do keep in mind that some of these places are looking to take care of this, 2 weeks we got this, and they have another set of time for planning for the year. So they're looking to move on these positions. And so they may say, hey, can you come in this week? So do keep that in mind and it's difficult because you don't know when you might get that call. But I certainly remember when I was leaving the PhD program and starting to go back into the public school, you get a call and I was like, I'm in Ireland. I can't, I can't. It's different now with Zoom because that's a bit more accepted, but they're not going to want a demo lesson over Zoom. I imagine. I've never heard of that, but that may be a thing. So typically they want to meet you face to face at some point there. So you do need to have a bit of that flexibility and planning as you go into it.
Thank you. Really important to remember the timeline because it doesn't mimic the higher ed one. Thank you.
I want to speak to the timeline for a moment. Colin's absolutely right that different places will have different timelines within independent schools. The timeline is actually now. There are plenty of people who have been awarded sabbaticals, who have been awarded leaves of absence, and that is happening during essentially the month of January. And then the letters of agreement or contracts, if you will, are distributed amongst the faculty, sort of, sometime between February and early March, right around spring break. And depending on the school, they are returned before schools go on spring break, which depending on if it's a March spring break or an April spring break, there will be lots of hiring happening for particularly the administrative teams during that time. The last thing I will say is that because it's not just sabbaticals and leaves of absence, because it's retirements, because it's people whose spouses and partners have chosen to accept a position elsewhere, hiring happens at the most inopportune moments, perhaps to us, as Colin was alluding to, over the summer. And there could be the sudden vacancy, and there's a stack of resumes. And instead of launching a brand new, someone who is hiring may look at previously received resumes or candidates that they've interviewed that came in like second and third position and may reach out. So you just never know, particularly within the independent school world. The timeline is actually earlier and extends longer depending on what happens within current employees and families. That's for teaching positions. For administrative positions, the hiring, depending on the level within the position, can certainly be earlier, as in the fall before the start year in July 1. If you're pursuing a position within the business office or the finance department or the admissions team or the advancement development, those timelines are also just a whenever the need arises. And so that's going to be slightly different even to the top level administrative positions within the school or the academic classroom teaching positions that exist.
Terrific. Thank you. And thanks also for shining a light on the administrative side. And I would say that that's an option we don't talk enough about. So I'm really glad you raised that, because there's incredibly rewarding work to be done in the infrastructure and administration management of a school, and interesting career paths. In fact, I'm thinking maybe the next panel we run should explicitly address this, because there are lots of paths forward that don't exclude other paths either. There's crossover possibilities too. Sarah, Nikki, final thoughts?
First, thank you for having me on this panel. It's been really interesting and rewarding to hear everyone's questions and different perspectives on secondary school teaching. I have two final thoughts. One, after you finally get your secondary school teaching job, be prepared for the semester to last a lot longer. Be prepared for the academic year to last about a month longer than it does on the academic calendar. That hit me like a ton of bricks, because on the university calendar you're wrapping up classes early May, finals are done mid-May. Okay, bye, see ya. Oh no, we go into mid-June. And I remember at the end of May thinking, why am I so tired? And I thought, oh, I'm used to being on summer mode now. So just be prepared for that. The second thing is just be open to doing new stuff and to working with age groups that you never thought in a million years you would work with. I was very skeptical of teaching middle school at first, but now they are by far my favorite group to teach. They're so curious about the world. They're also hilarious, although they can be a bit feral at times, like last period Friday. But yeah, just be open.
Thank you. Really good advice on both counts. Nikki, final thought?
Sarah, you hit so many good points there. I do think the calendar always gets me. I look longingly at my friends' children who are home for the college break, and I say, oh, you don't even know. You don't even know. I think there are so many rewards for this life of working with this population, and I think the idea of building. I think Liz hit the nail on the head in terms of building the networks. We have lots of contacts at lots of schools, build those networks. Carney Sandow, I've been working with the same person from my first application in 1995, and I've built that network. And I work closely with someone from Educators Allies also, but the fact that I've built those webs, get your little black book, virtual or real, and build those networks and connect with people, because as you ask questions, it's really, really useful, and connect with people here or wherever, but like keep the names and keep those logs of things, because those questions build other questions and become really, really useful as you're finding your way. And the mantra that I have right now is trust the timing of your life, because that is how I was able to take that ridiculous leap of faith that has made me really glad that I did. It was crazy and bold and ridiculous, but it actually led me to do what I needed to do. But do what you need to do for yourself and your family, but know what your needs are, and know that you can do whatever it is that you need to do. I know that sounds very vague and maybe a little bit spiritual, but I think figuring it out is right for you. No one else can tell you what's right for you. And I miss parts of the college world, but I don't also, because I know I'm exactly where I need to be right now. And that's exactly, it's not going to be right for anyone else, but for me. And it worked out as ridiculous as my plan was. No one thought it was the right idea, but everyone actually said, I'm really glad you did that, as soon as it worked out. Look at that. Everyone said it was stupid and crazy. And then, oh, I'm so glad you did it. So, but thank you for having me. And I wish everyone the best of luck.
Thank you so much. You're right. I too have, as someone who stepped off of conventional academia and left a university and left a tenured job to join ACLS, I had similar reactions of people saying, wow, that really seems like a great job for you once I was settled in it and clearly enjoying it. So, well, I want to thank you all. I want to say especially thank you for opening up, shining a light on some of the unknown spaces for our audience. We always have in members of our audience, not only people who themselves are seeking the career transition we've been talking about, but they're teachers, they're teachers of graduate students, faculty in colleges and universities, I should say, who want to help us spread the word. And that's really what we're trying to do here is lift this up as an exciting, rewarding, and I would just say civically important, really existentially important career track, a way to contribute to the life, thriving, knowledge, empathy, understanding, curiosity, state of democracy. All of those things by working with our young people. So I also want to thank you all for being very human about in the way you're talking about your work and your path to it. I appreciate that, and I know our audience does too. So let me thank each and every one of you for joining us, and we hope to stay in touch. Maybe we'll see you again on a panel, and thanks also to the audience for joining us today. Best of luck to all of you from all of us at ACLS, and thank you to my colleagues behind the scenes who made all of this possible. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.